Emily, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you. I am so excited. And I have to brag on you for a second, if you don't mind. Before we started recording, I was sharing with you that this is such a fun real life connection to me because when I started my podcast, How'd She Do That? One, I think you were already up and running. And two, you were one of my first listeners to send over like a long DM that was personal, but that made me be like, people are listening to my podcast. So thank you. I think of
Oh,
you when I think of my early listeners. So I just
oh,
had to brag on you and all that
oh
you're
my God.
doing.
Thank you, Emma.
Oh,
Well, no, you were talking about something real that was happening that you were
oh,
considering. I was like, oh my gosh, let me see. How can I help? Because I've gotten so much from your podcast, listening to you and your guests and the way you interview, you break it down so simply, which is a gift. I think we sometimes overcomplicate things and the way you ask questions and then your voice. I could listen to your voice all day. You have this beautiful,
oh,
beautiful voice.
oh, thank you. I have been told that a few times. So I'm like, you know what? I think I'm in the right department then. I'm going to keep moving in this direction when people
Yes.
share that. So
Yes,
thank
it's a
you
gift.
again. Oh, yes.
So I like to start every podcast by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Okay, so this is so fun because you sent that earlier and I thought, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, what did I not want to be? I don't know exactly what it is about my personality, but I
Mm.
did everything. I thought I want to be an actress. I thought, oh, I want to be a model at one point in middle school. Don't know what that was about. I think I was just taller than the boys. But for a long time, there was a thought of would it look like to act? That would be so fun.
Mhm, mhm,
But really, I've always just dreamed the craziest dreams, even from
mm.
little young age. And so, yeah, I think when I was little, if you'd said, what do you want to be? I would have said an actress at one season, and the other season would have been veterinarian because I
Oh.
love animals.
Oh.
And so veterinarian was at the top of my list until my cousin reminded me that you would actually have to operate on animals. And I actually sat in middle
Oh
school
my God.
on an operation
On what?
of a dog.
Oh my God.
It's a okay story, but I ended up feeling a little faint. So I
Mm.
soon realized, okay, I can't be a vet. So I was a little all over the place, but always thinking, how can we put on a show? And just loving
Mm.
that as a child, just loving thinking, oh, I want to put on a show. What could that be like? So
Mm.
for a large chunk, I was really thinking an Oscar was probably in my future.
Maybe still, we never
Who
know.
knows? You never know.
Well, and how does it connect to what you do today, do you think?
Well, it's so fun to think about this. And I was sharing before we started recording that this would be challenging for me to go back and think about me because I want to be asking you the same questions. But it's amazing to think now and to recognize the joy that I feel after a recording, even this one. The fact that people are going to listen to this and hopefully, in
Mm,
some way, shape, or form, be inspired to think about their own lives. When I was a child, part of the allure of being an actress or doing something on stage was how many people I could
mm,
connect to.
mm.
So I think that ties in really interestingly with How'd She Do That? And
Yes.
seeing the numbers come in. I know you're familiar and each
Mhm.
week you see the numbers and you're like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, I don't know who's listening, but I
Yep.
see that there's hundreds, thousands of listeners.
Mm,
Okay, so at
mhm,
some point I'm going to connect with them like you and I. So that was kind of the bow that I could put together and
mm,
thinking I've always loved people.
mm.
And so I think that ties in and animals. But I think people, it ties back to my love of people and love of storytelling. I think that's where I
Mm.
landed with that one.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you worded that. You wanted to put on a show, and you are literally putting out a show every week.
Isn't it crazy? I mean, to
Mm,
think, and two, I always love to think about this. And I don't know that if this was something that someone told me or it was something that I just realized, but early after graduating from Baylor University,
mhm,
I started to dream up what might be next and thinking, okay,
mhm,
what could be next in my life? And I had someone communicate to me that my role that I would step into in the future may not even exist yet because of innovation,
mm,
because of social media or because of XYZ. And I think back to, I'm sure that when I graduated, there were podcasts, but it wasn't where
A
it
big
is
thing.
now.
Yeah.
Exactly. It wasn't a big thing. I don't think people knew how to have their own little home set up, like you're so beautifully behind you. We didn't know how to do all that stuff. And
Mm,
so I always think that's so encouraging for folks who are recent grads or looking to pivot in
mm,
their career. It's like there's some innovation that could be happening now that your role isn't even available to you yet. So just take
mm.
a pause. And yeah, for me, that's how I feel about podcasting. I would have never dreamed to have a show.
And you're so great at it. And your
Oh,
passion comes through with every guest and with every episode. It's a gift. So thank you for being open to that, to the
oh,
possibility of trying something new. I think a lot of us can struggle with that. I see this in
mhm.
client conversations as a coach. It
Yes.
takes a lot of courage to, like you just said, hundreds, thousands of people are
Yeah.
listening, and that can be scary.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Was there any of that for you?
I think it's really fun, and perhaps someday I'll do an episode where I really deep dive, like, how I
Yeah.
was feeling on episodes. But the one that I think back on at the very beginning, I had Leah Ashley on, and she was a TV host for a long time out here in Los Angeles. She's amazing. I was paralyzed, nervous talking to her because she's like episode number 5 or something like that.
Mhm.
And if you go and look
I
at her
don't think
social
I've listened to that one. I
oh,
need to go
oh,
back.
if you listen, you'll be like, "Emily, are are you there?" Like, you will truly think like, "Is Emily on this phone call?" Because I just wasn't. I was like, "Oh my goodness." And even before this call, I'm like, "I haven't done an interview that I'm talking about myself in so long." I think that for whatever reason, and even more recently, as you step out and as you move forward with different conversations, you do build a lot of confidence. So
Yeah.
one of my largest guests would have been Alex Snodgrass of The Defined Dish, who was
Great
lovely.
episode.
Oh,
Great
thank
episode.
you. I mean, she was so fun and so professional. And I'm so happy and proud to say I was not nervous. I really was not
Mm.
nervous. And that would be one you think, well, Emily, you probably, that's crazy. But I think that building confidence comes with practice and time and being able
Mm.
to hone your craft, which again, these are all new things to me. I'm only have been doing this for a year.
Yeah. I can't remember if I listened to this on your podcast or maybe you were talking about it with someone, but you talked a little, or maybe you posted as a comment, what led you to starting the podcast?
Yeah.
And,
Oh my
and so I'd
goodness.
love for you to share what led you to this project that's such a big part of your life now.
Oh, well, thank you. This is really a fun one. And a lot of people don't know this. So I'm happy that you would bring it up. But during 2020, obviously, everyone's lives were changed dramatically. And I won't even linger on that because what a year. But they did. They changed dramatically. And for me specifically, one of my full time roles is
Mhm.
actually social media in luxury boutique hotels. Okay, so
Mm.
you tie in luxury boutique hotels with 2020, and we can all get the equation there. We were put on hold. We had clients that they closed and things like that. So I really had to recognize, okay, I've got more time on my hands. Over the past few years, I had fallen in love with podcasts, and I always thought I could do that. I would love that. I think that would be so fun. I've had compliments on my tone and voice before. And so perhaps this is something I should think twice about. And I don't actually know what made me press go apart from I could not do it. And
Mm.
I think that happens to people when you really think, and I'm sure you have experienced this with your
Mm.
own business and with coaching and recognizing that you are able to help. I recognized that it was something I could not do.
Mm.
And even as there's been challenges with the podcast, and even as I've looked at and thought, when is this going to be something that can be sustainable financially? When are the numbers going to be what I think they should be? When are we getting there? I just can't stop.
Mhm.
So it started with something that I just knew I had to do because it was just in me. I just was like, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret it.
Mm.
And now that I'm doing it, if I ever stopped, which I have no plans to, it's too much of my passion and excitement to stop,
Mm.
even when it feels like, okay, when are things gonna pick? Oh, okay, I thought that was gonna pop off. I thought that was gonna pop
Even
off.
when there's like doubt, a little
Even
bit of
when, exactly, well said. Even when there's a doubt of like, am I actually helping someone? But
mm.
then I get a DM or I get even the shortest sentence of like, obsessed with your podcast. I'm like, okay, I'll do 25 more.
That's just like a sign. It's just like keep
Yes.
going.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I truly feel that way. And I think too, one thing I'm really excited about that I think laying the foundation of beginning the podcast, back to your original question, one thing I'm really looking forward to is I have so many amazing guests. One of them that was very early on, her name's Tina Foster. She's in the
Mm.
UK, and I've been sharing just different updates with my friends on social media with our new home and whatnot. And she's commented recently, she said, I can't wait to be there someday. And, I'm thinking about the future connections in life that I'll have and these real life friends, and every single time, and even to you, and you're in Dallas, so you'll be easier to find. But I hope to be able to meet these folks in person and thank them in person. But it
Mm.
goes back to my thoughts earlier about an audience or a show. It's like, I always wanted to be connected to people. So to know
Mm.
that each Tuesday I'm connecting not only with an audience, but with a guest that at some point I can meet in person and thank. I mean, we have
Mm.
Sharon Santoni in Paris. I'm going to go find her someday. So it's just who I am, I think. It's just
Mm.
who I am. And I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I know my top value is connection, and I see that coming through for you very clearly. And then one of the things that I love that you share on your podcast that has motivated me and encouraged me, and I'm sure it's done the same for other people, is you always ask guests, who do you know that might
Mhm.
be a good fit for the podcast? And you
Mhm.
encourage the power of networking.
Mhm.
And it's all women guests, female entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I've struggled with is sometimes feeling like I don't want to bother people in reaching out. And the
Yeah.
fact that you're encouraging and saying this is a good thing, you're asking on the podcast, I think it's so
Yeah.
encouraging because not just in podcasting, but in any industry, in any area of our life, who do you know if we're struggling with the
Mhm.
health thing, if we're wanting a
Mhm.
new group of women to connect to, a
Mhm.
new role, the power of connection can have such a positive impact. Would you
Mhm.
mind sharing your thoughts on it? How do you think about it? Because I think
Mhm.
there's something there that I see in you that's a value for you that you
Mm.
just share so beautifully and you practice it.
Well, I appreciate that. And a couple of thoughts are coming to mind. One, I was rush chair in my sorority, which I think says a lot about
Yeah.
me. So I have been thinking about this for a very long time. And I always love thinking of who can be friends. Ooh, I
Mm,
met the cutest girl, and I know that her big, in sororities, you
mm,
guys, you have big and littles, and it's who you get along with, upperclassmen. And that just felt like a puzzle to me. I was such a connector then, and it's in my DNA in that way. But I love what you just shared about hesitation in networking. And I find that to be very rare for people who you may want to reach out to. Now, there might be people who have insane schedules that are challenging, but in my experience, I have had one gal say no to coming onto the podcast.
mm.
And I think it was a schedule. I think it was her schedule. And it might be that later on I reconnect with her, but it was a blessing of way to go. Awesome. Love it. I can't know, I'm not going to be able to do that. That was one. Okay. And I
Mm.
probably communicated with upwards of 200 at this point. And those people are coming on and we are going to move forward with them. So I think the fear around networking is really within your own head. And I would encourage anyone who's listening, if there is someone that's come to mind that you have thought about connecting with and reaching out, the worst thing that they can do is say no. The best thing that could happen is you work for them, you become best friends, you start a
Mm.
company together, you're inspired to kick off a new mission or goal in your own life. Two real quick examples I'd love to share in regard
Yes.
to networking would be, gosh, post grad, I'm thinking about what do I want to do? What do I want to do with my life? I had a communications major. It's very broad, but is really being put into practice now in my life. But I was thinking, how do I narrow this down? At the time, I had run a marathon. I loved
Mm.
working out. And someone told me, what do you do on the weekends? Think about those things. I'm like, okay, well, I
Mm.
enjoy being outside. I enjoy being active. And then the next step that person gave me was, okay, think about companies that might be in line with that. But in my situation, I was really very specific about location. And so he said, okay, think about locations, think about companies, merge the two and
Mm.
see what you come up with. So we came up with like Asics, Foot Locker, Nike. I was kind of at that point, my senior year of college, thinking that that would be really cool. Well, within the networking and connecting, and to your point, realm, and this was not challenging, talking with my neighbor, sharing what I'm thinking. Lo
Mm.
and behold, we connect the dots. And he's like, well, would you have any interest in working at Foot Locker corporate? I know you mentioned New York being on your list. And well, actually, my cousin is the CEO of Foot
Wow.
Locker.
Wow.
If you want me to send your resume,
Mm.
I'm like,
Yeah.
So I think that networking and
Mhm.
connecting, to your point, it can be as genuine as that. It can be as genuine as communicating your passions, communicating your hopes on next steps, and then sharing it and seeing who comes your way. My role with the luxury boutique hotels that I mentioned earlier
Mhm.
is through an Instagram comment. I
Mm.
asked for an informational interview
Wow.
with my now boss and said, "Ah, your life is amazing. I'd love to learn more about you. I'd love to just have 30 minutes of your time."
Wow.
She said, "Yes, we've been working together for 7 years."
Wow.
So I just love to break any barriers of fear or worry or what might they say. It's like, what might they say? I honeymooned at one of my client hotels. Ask the
Mm.
people, connect with people, and put yourself out there. The worst that can happen is someone says no.
The word that came up as you were talking was possibility,
Love that.
opportunity. And you said communicate it, share it, being open to maybe there's some vulnerability there too. I
Mm,
haven't found a job. I'm
Right.
looking for a job. I want to work in New York. Being open to sharing those things, to
Yeah.
connecting with people, and being
Mhm.
open to the possibility of what could
Mhm.
happen, of what that could lead to.
Yeah. When I speak with women and I hear what you just said that connected the dots for me is like fear, concern. A lot of women are not confident in their resume or different things like
Mm.
that. And so, just a practical tip right off the bat I wanted to share for folks is, again, a lot of times it's back to that resume. And I think about when you go back to that question that someone asked me of, what do you do on the weekends? What do you enjoy? Right.
Mhm.
So I always love to remind people, if you're not confident about your resume or you're like, I don't like my resume, make sure what's on it is things you want to do again. If you have
Mm.
something on your resume that you don't ever want to do again, don't put it on there because they're going to think you want to do it again, or they're going to say, oh, she can do that. And
Mm.
so I think that even back to your thought on confidence, it's like there's different tools guided to utilize. Like when you run into someone and you say, I loved getting to see you today. Is there any way could I actually grab your email? I'd love to send you my resume now that you know a little bit about me and you know what I'm looking for. And by the way, feel free to send that over to someone if anyone comes to mind. But to have tools like that, that you're confident and excited to share. When someone told me that, when they told me, take off things on your resume that you don't want to do, I was like, what? It has to be like the most loaded, longest resume. And they were like, no, no, no,
The
no.
rule follower in me is like, but don't I have to put don't
You
I have
know,
to list? And
yes,
it's so
yes.
interesting. That's so interesting. But
Yeah,
I don't
isn't
want
it?
to do at one point I did bank reconciliations, not that there's anything wrong with it, but like I don't want to do that anymore. So,
Right.
maybe I don't highlight that on my resume if I were
Exactly,
looking for a
yes.
role.
That just comes to mind, that just hit me like a ton of bricks in regard to networking, of have tools that you're excited to share. And that one was just so freeing for me to be like, oh, my resume can be something I'm excited about. And I don't have to put that. And I don't have
Mm.
to put this. I can put what really I want to do and make sure that that's highlighted.
I think there's also a theme of not being afraid of that rejection. So you said asking someone, can I send you my resume? And if you
Hmm.
know of someone, could you send it out? Making the ask and
Hmm.
then not being afraid of the rejection, or being okay with if the person says, you know what, I don't know anyone, or them not
Yeah.
sending it out. People are really generous. I think most
Yeah.
people try to help someone who asks,
Yeah.
but we have to ask first and we have to be
Yes.
willing to get the no.
Exactly. As you're sharing that, I was thinking about what's my best example of rejection. Only one can I say was a straight up no. And I almost want to go back and look at that email and see if there was a
Mm,
reason behind it. I think my biggest fear in podcasting would be, yeah, that I send it out and someone would say, no, you're a loser, or
mm,
no, your podcast sucks. And obviously, that's not something I am planning on experiencing. I'm sure if you, with growth, you could find something like that. But it reminds me of a time, again, when I was working at Foot Locker in marketing and PR. I was so excited about social media, and they had a new ladies brand that they had launched, and I
mm,
was an intern. And on my own time, I made a project. No one asked me to do this, but I made a
mm,
project, a PowerPoint of what I thought would be amazing Instagram overload update that I just thought would be awesome. And I ended up giving it to the director of marketing there, who's an amazing woman. I don't know that she's still there, but nothing happened. Crickets. And I didn't ever follow back up.
mm,
I didn't ever say, hey, I told you I put that there. Did you see it? I think that I thought, oh, she saw it and she thought it was terrible. She's embarrassed for me,
mm.
all of these things. And as an adult now, which I was almost an adult then. I was an adult, but looking back on that, I feel for myself that
Mm,
my reaction was, oh, she probably thought that that was horrible or that that was
mm,
lame. And now I'm like, no, she probably didn't even really look at it. And I didn't follow up to schedule a meeting with her to say, hey,
mm,
let's review that. I'm really passionate about it. I'd love to talk to the team. And there was already a team working on it. I didn't collaborate with them. I didn't tell them that I had given it to her. So I think sometimes back to the theme of connection, if you ostracize yourself in a work setting or in a personal
mm,
setting with entrepreneurship and you don't reach out like you have done to me and how I have done to you, then you can think up these different versions that are happening that aren't even happening,
mm.
if that makes sense. And so when I
Yes.
think back on a moment that I felt extremely rejected, it was actually my own thoughts. It was actually me.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for highlighting that. I see this in client conversations all the time. We make up stories about what people are thinking about us, and it can keep us paralyzed from taking
Yes.
action, from launching the podcast, because we're making up these stories in our head. I call it
Mhm.
the inner critic in coaching conversations of our inner
Yes.
critic is telling
Yes.
us that we're going to
Yeah.
fail or that person didn't like us, that people, whatever it is. And it
Yeah.
can keep us from taking action and moving towards the things we're excited about.
And I think too, I love that you would just name it inner critic for sure. I think it's so helpful. And one thing I am always constantly trying to weigh with how does she do that? And it's why we stepped into those Friday favorite episodes where it's literally just me talking. I don't have a script or anything. I feel like when you're able to share that inner critic and you're able to be honest, because if I've learned one thing with social media, with the podcast, whatnot, there's a lot of mystery, there's a lot of secrecy online
Mm,
in regards to followers or numbers or money. There's a lot to be said about that. And so I think that when you hear someone else communicate what their inner critic is saying, it brings things to the light and it allows other people to recognize their thoughts are one, they're not alone in those thoughts, but two, those thoughts are kind of crazy. For me to think that that project that I gave to that VP, she was actually a VP, I might have called her director earlier, VP at Foot Locker, for me to think she just thought, oh, that was so stupid. I'm
mm,
embarrassed that that intern gave me that.
mm.
She didn't think that, but that was what my inner critic was saying. And so I think that I have come a long way in my inner critic. And honestly, I will shut down stuff like that. If it comes up in my mind, I'm like, no, I am good at this. I do have a voice that is great for podcasting. I am going to keep moving. So I love that that's where you've taken this conversation for listeners. It's like really to be aware of that voice because it's not true. And to walk forward and to partner with a lie about yourself,
Mm,
that's going to hold you back in any
mm.
area of life.
Yes. The other side of it is what I call the inner leader. And I think your inner leader is telling you what you just said. You are great at this. Keep going.
Hmm.
You're doing an amazing job. And then like on those Friday favorite episodes, I love that you share kind of what you're thinking because like you just talked about, when we share those inner critic thoughts,
Hmm.
it's like we're taking them out of the dark, bringing them into the light, and they just don't
Mm.
stand there anymore.
Hmm.
Because once we bring them out, it's like, no, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't
Yeah.
feel right.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I had a conversation with a gal yesterday. I have a group of women at Pepperdine University that I meet with
Mhm.
weekly. And one of them said something about herself. And she said out loud, and she said, well, when I say it out loud, it sounds stupid. And I said exactly what you just said. I actually said the exact same thing. I said, but when you say it out loud, it's good to say it out loud. It brings it to the light. And it's almost good to hear it out loud so you can recognize how stupid it is.
It's like, oh, that doesn't sound right. No, that's not right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you sharing it also connects people with, I'm not alone in thinking, or I love how open you are about how am I going to make this profitable? I think there's a lot of comparison. And so someone who's
Mhm.
launching a podcast for the first time, if they look at your podcast and oh, she's had great guests, Emily's
Mhm.
great at this. If you weren't so open about like, I'm still trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
they may feel like they can't do it. Like, well, Emily already must have big partnerships. Emily must be making.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you're open about it is encouraging. And
Yeah.
probably people are connecting with you more deeply. Maybe some people don't reach out. They're
Mhm.
thinking it. They're thinking, oh, I like Emily. She's
Oh.
honest. She's
Mhm.
vulnerable. You said there's hundreds or thousands of people listening
Mhm.
to those thoughts of, I don't know yet. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, I really appreciate that because that is my hope. And as I've stepped into, and you've experienced this, putting yourself out online, and when you start connecting to women, and I love my guests, and all of my guests have been absolutely amazing. But the episodes you think are going to pop off are not the ones that
Mm,
get the most listenership. And I think people would
mm,
be really interested to see the inside scoop on that. And I think, too, many of my guests, and this is a whole other conversation, a lot of my guests, folks may assume they come from a very privileged background or upbringing. And it's
mm.
been really fun for many of them to say that's not the case. Now, some of them, that is the case, and more power to them. I love that they were able to step into their different entities and continue to work and build even bigger, even better. But I think that that's something that's really interesting. It's always my goal to pull back the curtain, And for me, as I'm looking at numbers, probably next year going to hit 100,000 downloads, which is
That's
amazing.
amazing. Amazing.
It's amazing, but I think people would be surprised. There are episodes that I put out, they don't reach 1,000. They don't reach
Mm,
1,000 listeners. Most of them are maybe in the 800. Lots of
mhm.
them are over 1,000. I think our most listened to is about 5,000. But I love sharing those numbers because that's the inside scoop, and even getting creative and thinking, how can I make money on this? I don't have a giant group of people who are going to links and buying from me. That feels oversaturated. Okay, how can I connect the dots? How can I do affiliates with guests? How can I make it make sense so that my listeners feel like, oh, she's supporting her guest. And if I purchase through this link, I can support her. So it's all about just being flexible and creative, but it's also really, you guys, there's a lot of secrecy behind the doors. And that's what I don't want to be a part of. I
Mm.
don't want it to be like, oh, Emily, she lives in LA. She must have all these different connections. No, I'm sending Instagram DMs to people. I want it to be real, and my like to know it account, it's not popping off. I love when I get a little commissions, but it's not I'm not retiring from my other roles. I think that's something too that people don't recognize. I have two full-time jobs that I work,
Mm.
and I don't speak about those because one of them is pretty boring. But
But
I,
yeah, thank you. And I do want to highlight that the
no,
fact that you have a role, a full-time role, two roles, because I think sometimes there's a thought for many people, I want to launch a podcast or I want to do work I love. I need to
yeah,
quit. I need to go all in. It's all or
yep,
nothing.
yep.
And you're a great example of building something that you're passionate about. It's growing consistently. You're
Mhm.
still have maintained this safety net, your main role. And I think a lot of the times when we hear about stories of success, we forget or we don't pay attention to that there was
Mhm.
like this period of working our full-time role and doing the passion project or
Yeah.
whatever it is. So I'd love for you to share your thoughts on that.
What's coming to mind is a picture I posted. I'll have to see if I can find it of me recording very early on in my one bedroom apartment, one bath in Los Angeles. And this was just a few months ago, you guys. I only just recently moved into my house. And there was a picture that we took, and the chair I'm sitting on is hideous. I hate the chair that I have pieces of furniture I don't like. Hated that chair. I have my podcast stuff on my dresser, and I posted and I thought, because it would be so much more fun to post the studio in Los
Mm,
Angeles, my private space, whatever. It's way more fun to think about the end period. And it's way more fun to be at the end period and then show the beginning and be like, look at me in my parents' attic recording this podcast because the landscapers were so loud. It feels like it would be more fun, but I don't know what exactly it was. But early on, I was like, I don't want to be like that. And I think there's a lot of assumptions that happen online. A lot of people can assume even that I come from a very well off background
mm,
or my husband does, or there's lots of assumptions that can be made. There's assumptions when you see a woman online and you think that's her full-time job. You see her share links and you immediately think this person doesn't have a full-time job. Lo and behold, if you dig a little bit more, most of them do. Most of them
mm.
have full-time roles or their own businesses or their own clients. So I just, for whatever reason, I wanted to just say, I'm learning. I know nothing. I live in a one bedroom, one bath in Los Angeles. This is my life right now. I'm working to pay off our student. My husband had law school loans, working to pay those off. I just want things to be in the light. I don't want it to be a facade. And I could very easily create a facade, but something in me doesn't think that's going to be helpful to other people.
Oh, I love that you shared that. And as you're talking, I'm reminded you were talking about your patio. And I hope this doesn't sound like a creeper, like, oh my gosh, she's like,
No, I love my patio. I want you to come visit.
well, you're talking about your patio and you're like, oh, I love this store, but it's so expensive. And I just put it all
Yes.
in my cart and look at the total. And this is insane. And I
Yes.
think people relate to that. Like, okay,
Yes.
well, you can see these beautiful images on Instagram of the podcast studio or the patio
Yeah.
or the whatever and think, oh my gosh, I don't have it together. It's just me. And so I love that you're sharing that that's part of what's important to you. And I think that's why people are connecting with you. And I think someone listening wants to connect. I know when I post stories on my Instagram, it's the ones where Ellie dropped glitter all over the floor that people like,
Yes.
oh yeah, I just got rid of my dining room because now it's a playroom. And I got so many messages on that because I'm like, rest in peace to my dining room because right now at this season of life, my 3-year-old needs space to play. And that's the truth.
Yes.
And I want the Instagrammable dining rooms, but
Yes.
right now it's more important to have Ellie have an area of her own. And so I love that you shared that. And I think that's an important element of connection, which is something you're so good at. And I think we can all learn from too, is being vulnerable, being honest. That is a source of connection, not perfection.
Well, I love what you just shared because too, I applaud women in motherhood who are online and sharing and inspiring others. And so many of my guests are in that season of life. And I'm very curious. I could go into a whole conversation and start interviewing you. It's very hard for me not to. But for you to be in that season of life and to be able to connect and encourage and just again pull the blinders off, because I enjoy following people who that's the case. They have their dining room set up every single day for a new dinner party. It's amazing. It's like, whoa, you have a lot of
Beautiful.
friends.
Yeah.
Beautiful. But I love when there's a behind the scenes element that is much more natural, much more of a connection. And I'm even trying, I love that we're even talking about this because I'm even trying to figure out what that looks like for me, even in what do I share? Or is there a connection to things happening in the world that I want to touch on? What does this look like? And I just feel like for me, establishing how'd she do that, connecting with listeners, gaining that ground up listenership that connects with me, and then kind of looking to them and saying, okay, guys, what more do you want to share? I always find it quite funny when people will put out a Q&A and it's like, what more do you want to see from me? And I don't know that I've ever done that, but because I don't know what people would want to see. And I find that to be a really funny question. And I think too, if I put that out, I think it would be crickets. That's the other thing about social media that a lot of people don't understand. Some people are putting things out and they're not getting anything back. They might project that they are, but they're not. There's lots of times that and I have a podcast that hundreds of people listen to. I'll put out a question. I get nothing. I just want to shed so much more light on the social media realm and the behind the scenes. It's not what people think it is. And I don't know how to explain it besides when I started the podcast, I thought it'd be like an uptick. And there were guests, there were things that I'm like, I'm going to be on the Today Show.
You will be one day. One day.
Thank you. One day. But I think that's kind of my encouragement too, is this smoke and mirrors effect. And I'm not hating on social media. It's the main way that I get my podcast out. It's how I've connected with you and it's how I can continue to connect with amazing women. And that's my real use for it. But don't compare your beginning to someone else's end. Don't compare their highlight reel to your everyday life. Just really, I can't encourage that enough.
I think that's going to resonate with so many people across all aspects of life. I think I heard once, if someone or someone's family seems perfect, you just don't know them well enough. Like
You don't know them.
As a coach, I get to hear all the behind the scenes, all the things that are going on that people may not normally share on social media. And it gives me comfort to know that we're all going through things. We're all struggling and there is no perfect, or everyone, whoever you look to social media. I love this person's life seems perfect. They're struggling with something and that's okay. And that's part of the journey and that's part of life. And then you with the podcast, not trying to project this is all great and I'm making tons of money. I think that's going to be really helpful for people who are listening, and it's okay. And we don't have to wait till it's perfect. Like you talked about this podcast studio. We don't have to wait for perfection, for all the things to be in place to launch something.
Yes, I love that. Absolutely. Just, it's funny. I'm kind of bringing that HSDT moment, Pause and rewind and listen to what Lupe just said because it's so true. I love everything you just shared. And the last little additional thought that I'd love to, because
Mhm.
you just reminded me of this, I also have heard it said, if there's someone in your life that you think, I want to trade lives with them or their life looks perfect, I've heard it said that if you actually knew what was really happening with them, and if you knew the struggles and potentially baggage that they carry, you would not want to trade anything.
Mm.
And you can think about that in lots of different ways with people you admire or respect. And I love finding inspiration from folks, but never in a million years would I trade my life for somebody else's because you don't know what's going on. And I love that we can take inspiration and run with it. I'm going to get off this call today and be like, oh my gosh, that was so much fun. I love sharing all of this. And I'm going to look around and be grateful that I have the voice and opportunity to speak with you. And so I think it's always going back to looking around. What is it that you can be grateful for? Comparison is truly the thief of joy, and recognizing what you have going on and running with it. Back to what you shared earlier, silencing that inner critic. Make sure they're not loud. Make sure that inner leader is louder than the inner critic. I love that you share that with your clients and that that's something that you help women with every day. It's amazing.
Oh, I love that. Well, I guess that's one of my final questions. What's been one of the big lessons you've learned through your podcast that you'd love to share with the audience today?
100% just get started.
Mm.
That is the theme. As we grow, as we continue to have amazing guests on, they are always saying that. They're always going
Mm.
back. Like we had Young, Wild, and Friedman on. She does
Oh, I love
like
that episode.
she's so fun. She does Play-Doh kits. And just recently she was highlighting, when she started and she had like a KitchenAid that she would make her Play-Doh in. And if you know what her warehouse looks like now, you would be like, oh my gosh. So just get started. Figure it out as you go. We have learned, I won't speak for you, but for me, I didn't know anything about audio. I didn't know anything about editing. I didn't know how to put a podcast up on iTunes. I didn't know anything. I still don't really know about sponsors. We're figuring it out as we go. So that would be my biggest takeaway is just get started, figure it out as you go. And I'm sure I'll have like a third thought at some point when I feel as though I've arrived a little bit more. Those are my two thoughts for sure from the podcast.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Emily. This is going to resonate with so many people. I love you and your podcast. It's been such a pleasure having you today.
And likewise, I'm so impressed with all that you're doing. And I know your clients are so lucky to have that one-on-one time with you. And again, just the support that you've given me from the very beginning means the world. So thank you.
Oh my God. Thank you.